You think about 1970s, 1980s, right? It used to be all paper operation of the financial services system. It became computerized 40 years ago. Now the computerized TradFi system is now moving on chain.
Yoshi Yokokawa is the co-founder and CEO of Alpaca. Armed with a massive $150 million Series D, he is building the regulated clearing layer that will finally bring Wall Street on chain.
We are the deepest layer of the custodian clearing layer of the whole financial services of the TradFi. Exactly same as Goldman or BMO. So being able to anchor that and then also being able to interact with the digital native operations, being able to fund it with the stablecoin connected to multiple chains, that combination makes us extremely unique. I started my career as a Lehman Brothers, so I understand those systemic risks does exist. So these on-chain financial operation actually removed so much risk away from the financial system. That's good for every single person on this planet. What we cannot ignore is that those major anchored foundational players like New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, DTCC, they are all in, right? Going into this tokenization. They're trying to be proactively involved. That's going to really accelerate the whole thing.
Catch the full strategy on building stablecoin brokerage infrastructure and why Wall Street is moving on-chain with Zach Fowler and Yoshi Yokokawa, only on Stable Dash.
The city by the Golden Gate. Truly the city of many wonders.
Hey, it's Zach here from Stable Dash. We are at a very stable conference with Yoshi from Alpaca. Yoshi, thanks for joining us. You were a last-minute add to the roster. I'm very thankful for Chris from Defense for introducing us and taking time out of your conference. How is this your first very stable conference, or were you here last year?
This is my very first time.
How have you been enjoying it today? How's the programming?
I think the guests are pretty interesting. I think actual conversations are pretty practical. So those are the things I really enjoy in this conference right now.
You guys just raised a pretty large Series D, if I understand. How much did you end up raising?
Yeah, we raised $150 million.
Wow. Well, first, congratulations. I'm
Thank
sure
you.
it's been quite the journey. And so when you talk about practical conversations for somebody in your shoes, because correct me if I'm wrong, Alpaca, not stablecoin native, not stablecoin focused at first. What is a practical conversation for you in 2026?
I think while the tokenization stablecoin usage is, rapidly increasing, regulatory frameworks getting sorted out very quickly as well. In the real economy that we live in, the reality is that, most of the things happen off-chain TradFi world. So I think we have to be always thinking about that, embracing the fact. And then thinking about what's happening and what will be happening in the future. So we can't ignore what's happening, forefront of everything, which is stablecoins and everything. But at the same time, we have to be also do the reality check of what's the majority of what's happening today as well to make sure that business can go on.
What is some of that friction right now with the off-chain and on-chain world? We were talking about a little bit about this prior to this, especially with the tokenization trend. I think back to a previous interview with Matt Hogan at Bitwise, he said, hey, stablecoins, people miss it. If everything's getting tokenized, you need stablecoins and you need liquidity to trade. How are you approaching that at Alpaca?
So I think how the world is going, I think about it, it's more whole financial services system is moving on chain. What I mean by whole financial services system is of course it has to be a payment,
right,
and it has to be actual financial assets has to be on chain, and other financial services insurance, card, everything has to be on chain. So I think when we talk about the stablecoin and tokenization, it's just really a piece of the whole financial system moving on chain. You think about 1970s, 1980s, right? It used to be all paper operation of the financial services system. It became computerized 40 years ago. Now the computerized TradFi system is now moving on chain. I think that's much simpler to think about this whole movement.
And so where's Alpaca in the on-chain journey right now? Maybe because I think, massive player in the space, but also probably a company that doesn't necessarily, you don't need the limelight. For somebody that doesn't necessarily know Alpaca, or you might have heard your name, where do you fit in that puzzle? We just talked about where stablecoins kind of fit into the financial service realm. Where does Alpaca fit in?
Yeah, so we are FINRA SEC regulated clearing broker dealer, and also DTCC member as well.
Say that 5 times fast.
Yeah, exactly. Multiple characters and letters, but I think that allows us to be extremely anchored We are the deepest layer of the custodian clearing layer of the whole financial services of the TradFi. Similar, exactly same as Goldman or BMO, Parging or everyone, right? So being able to anchor that, and then also being able to interact with the digital native operations, being able to fund it with the stablecoin connected to multiple chains, that combination makes us extremely unique. So that's really our role.
Okay, so I was saying we've seen the rise of Solana with like payments.org, institutions coming there. We've seen the rise of Canton with privacy. Is your approach to this market that you kind of have to cover everybody, or are you picking a sector and kind of staying narrow and deep? What's your approach been there?
That's a very good question. And then my answer to that is yes, we have to cover everything. The reason why for this is that, similar to there are multiple basic exchanges or, currencies, like when we are thinking about whole financial system moving on chain, I don't think it's going to be a one methodology that works for every single piece of it, right? For example, Canton, it has a very specific, the characteristics. It's public, but like it's privacy heavy. There's specific private one, and there's extremely public one. And then there's like certain things that like optimize for certain use cases. And I think not every single financial services have the exact same requirements or priorities, which means that there will be like customized version of it, because like the whole financial services operation is extremely humongous. So I think it's really difficult for like one chain or one player to cover every single use case. And I think that's what we are seeing right now. And I think it's going to continue, in my opinion.
What does a financial service, what do you have to prioritize right now? Like, what is mission critical to Alpaca? I mean, that would even bring you to a very stable conference, kind of going back to that thread. But you mentioned right now that there are certain things you need to, these companies need to prioritize. What are some of those things?
Sure. I think like, the first priority is obviously like, Stablecoin, because like in order to create any, value exchange, of course, like payment has to happen. So I think that's what the, Stablecoin, or I think about it more of the tokenized dollar and then the next thing that would happen is that what is the next liquid assets that's in the TradFi that is not yet on chain, which is basically the US stocks, right? So that's how I see the priority of the things that's happening that we're observing right now.
Who's catching your attention right now in the space when it comes to tokenizing stocks?
Sure. So we work with the amazing innovator partners like Kraken, Ondo, Denari, and those basically like the companies who are tokenizing
Ondo
assets.
Is just moving fast. I mean, we have a news channel, and it's like each week I'm seeing an Ondo story, and there's one on our radar that we want to get an interview with.
I mean, like, their summit was pretty cool too. Ondo has been doing an amazing job. Their summit has been amazing too.
Oh, were you there recently?
Well, we were one of the speakers there as well. Because of that, we do a lot of collaborations with them too.
What did you dive in? Were you the main speaker there?
Yeah, we're one of the panel with the the DTCC as well. But I think like we talked about like how the future unfolds in terms of the tokenization of the liquid assets. And I think like what's interesting how the DTCC is involved with this is that they are also trying to figure out how to create basically like a non-collateralized eventually tokenization as well, right? Because they are the source of truth in terms of the certificate of the securities. So when that happens, that'll be really cool. But I think there are a lot of steps that we have to take. And then we're definitely like, try to be a part of that, try to support the process as well.
We've seen, stablecoins, it felt like it was, okay, we knew these were important. We didn't realize how important they were. And probably until the last 2 years. It feels like we're in a similar moment for tokenized equities. What does a timeline look like for this? And we've seen, you mentioned Kraken, but we've seen Coinbase, we've seen Robinhood obviously making moves here. But from a consumer perspective, it still feels very, I think, unknown when you talk to most people. What's your timeline horizon like for this trend?
I think like, the timeline, of course, everyone says it's very difficult to figure out. But I think about what is the last time this kind of a whole shift happened. That was, to me, it's a paper-based operations to the computerized system. So that started around 1970s. And we're still talking about like digital transformation 50 years later. So like we have to be actually realistic about how long it takes to move the whole financial operations and system on chain. However, at the same time, there's a definitely like political and the regulatory push that happens. obviously like the current government is very much pushing that, so it's accelerating a lot of things. And alongside with that, all other countries alongside with the US is pushing that as well. So I think that's going to accelerate. I don't think it's going to take 50 years, but I don't think it's going to be like next year. However, the reality is that all the transaction volume of those tokenized assets, that's continued to grow extremely fast. And the players that's coming into the sector is very fast. So what we cannot ignore is that those major, anchored foundational players like New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, DTCC, they are all like all in, right? Going into this tokenization, how they can get involved and how they can push. So they're not saying no. They're trying to be proactively involved. That's going to really accelerate the whole thing.
When did that shift? You said they no longer can say no. When was that shift for you? And like, when did your light bulb start going off that like, okay, on-chain finance is here to stay. Stablecoins are here to stay. And like, when did you really start diving deep?
So we did make a bet around like 4 years ago, even before FTX, when the FTX used to be here, that like, crypto, that just logically makes sense. Just simply efficient, like less risk because, settlement happens right away. So it removes a bunch of the financial systemic risk that like, global financial crisis. By the way, I started my career as a Lehman Brothers.
Okay.
So I, did experience that. So I understand those systemic risks does exist. So these like, on-chain financial operation actually removed so much risk away from the financial system. That's good for every single person on this planet. And also the, companies as well, right? So that's logically, it made sense to us that we have to commit to it. However, as you just asked, we don't know the timeline.
Yeah.
So we have to like kind of keep patient about it, but we have to keep investing, understanding, what works here and there, and trying to figure out what is the right timing to push more. So that's the kind of approach that we have been taking.
What would you leave a listener who is just joining this conversation? They're getting into stablecoin and on-chain finance. What do you think is top priority right now for them to understand?
I think the most important thing is that the word we see right now, especially if the listeners are in the United States, they may not really feel the real needs or real practicality of why stable coins are important. And I think once we step out of this country, travel around, go see that reality in Africa, Latin America, we really feel why it's needed. And then, as a brokerage infrastructure company, we work with hundreds of the retail broker dealers across the globe, like 50 different countries. We see different ways of like, money arriving from the country in Middle East to the United States. Multiple correspondent banking and everything. We see the practical problem why the existing fiat payment rails, would be really hard to work. So like, that experience allows us to really understand why it's needed. So for the people like who have not yet experienced that, I think needs to stay open, like what that person sees in front of their life. It's not everything.
It's been super challenging, I think, in the past few years, especially for people in the US. The amount of, I see some of our YouTube comments sometime and they're just like, stablecoins are so dumb. I just have a bank, or we get one all the time. Like, why would I use stablecoins? Like, Zelle is free, and it's like there's just a whole world out there that you just don't see right now. But Yoshi, thanks for joining us. It's great to meet you today, but thank you for making time out of your day to come on Stable Dash. Yeah, like I said, this has been our interview with Yoshi, CEO, co-founder of Alpaca. We'll see you next time. Tune into Stable Dash for more interviews.
The city by the Golden Gate. Truly the city of many wonders.